Diet is like probably InfoWars.
Because the other, okay, I hear it say recordings in progress.
Yep.
Okay.
And you're sharing, so I think it should.
Yeah. Now, do you still see the video on the side? You still do?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I might.
That might just be our own, people can just minimize,
Mm-hmm. There is, one thing I might just.
So good evening, and thank you for joining the Anti-Racism Commitment Coalition for another Community in Action discussion. ARC is a coalition of dedicated people committed to eradicating racism and spreading anti-racism throughout our communities, country, and the world. Through our online resources, podcasts, and events like tonight's Community in Action discussion, we hope to learn and grow together as we do the continuous work of transforming into anti-racists. Just a reminder to everyone that tonight's discussion will be recorded and it will be posted on our website as a resource for other ARC members who couldn't attend. Tonight, our discussion will focus on race and education and closing the opportunity gap. It will be led by one of ARC's resource committee members, Erica Thiem. She is excited to facilitate tonight's discussion on education because while not a professional educator, she has been raised in a family of teachers, and it's given her an appreciation and respect for the work. So I will turn it over to Erica. Thank you so much for attending, everybody.
Thank you, Jenny, and hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining. My name is Erica Thiem, and like Jenny said, I'm part of the resource team. And I was really keen to raise my hand for this topic on education. I've been working to educate myself. I'm not a parent, and as Jenny said, I'm not an educator. So as we go through tonight, I hope I can share some of the learning that I've had, and I really invite us all to have, a discussion as we go through this topic on the opportunity gap. And so the flow for tonight, I'm going to start with a brief story that I'd like to share with you as part of my learning journey. And then we have a 4-minute video that was put together by the Denver, Colorado School District and their local PBS news affiliate that I think really brings the opportunity gap to life. And then we're going to have, like we do at all of our community in action events, a dialogue. So I hope you have some either personal experiences or questions you'd like to share. This. Yep. Can you hear us okay? All right. This challenge of an opportunity gap for me is really taken even more of a center stage as we've gone through the last 18 months with COVID, where many students are learning in hybrid environments or learning from home, and that could actually increase some of the influence that create a disparity in learning opportunities for students. So we'll talk about that tonight. So I'm going to actually share my screen here, and we'll get right in.
I can see that, Erica, so it should be good.
Yeah, we'll get right started here. So I'm going to start with a story, and one of the things that I did to really build my own understanding of the educational opportunity gap and how it's different than the achievement gap was I spent an afternoon with Dr. Stanley Brown. Dr. Brown is the equity coordinator for the Hopkins, Minnesota School District. And it was just really an honor to be able to sit down face to face with him and benefit from some of his experiences. And he told me this story in his own voice. This is a story about Stanley Brown, Dr. Brown. And I'd like to do my best to kind of recreate it for you because it really brought home this concept of an opportunity gap to me. So I'm going to take you back to the early 1960s, and Dr. Brown, whose name is Stanley, and his classmate Mark are both Black kids living in Harlem, New York at the time. This is the early 60s, and both of these kids are fortunate because they are enrolled in the St. Mark the Evangelist Catholic school for Negroes and Indians. And I'm going to pause there for a minute because we're going to go back to the 60s here, and the backstory on this is interesting. This school, which was really focused on creating educational opportunities for Black students and Native American students that were in New York City at the time, was founded by a woman who was her name is Sister Catherine Drexel. And what's interesting is Sister Catherine was the heiress of the Drexel finance magnate family, a very affluent family in New York City at the time. And she decided to take her inheritance and focus on this calling or mission to work on educational benefits for students of color in New York. So, both Mark and Stanley had, they had some great things going for them because they had a private education with, instructors that were really focused on giving them the best chance possible for their educational success. A bit of a side note, this same sister, Catherine Drexel, actually went on to found Xavier University in Louisiana, which, I'm learning was the first Catholic HBCU university. So she did quite a lot with her fortunes and really helping education for communities of color. But the story kind of diverges at this point. So you've got Stanley and Mark, they're about 8 years old, they're going to school, and part of their curriculum includes the chance to have music education. And both boys have the chance to take piano lessons at school. Now, Stanley goes home after school and he's being raised by a single mom. Stanley's family lives in a rented apartment in Harlem. And his grandmother's a big part of his life. His grandmother's there after school and really helps, influence his upbringing and is a big part of his life. On the other hand, Mark's family has a two-parent household. His mom and dad are married. In fact, Mark's granddad worked at a General Motors plant and had a pension, which helped afford some generational wealth in Mark's family, allowing Mark's parents, who were also lighter-skinned Black family, achieve a mortgage to afford a brownstone home in Harlem. So they own their home. And both of these kids are taking their piano lessons at school. Mark gets to go home and his mom's around after school and they have a piano in their front parlor. And Mark's able to get his practice in. His mom is there to help encourage him, maybe help pester him to get his lessons done. And Mark turns out to be a pretty successful piano player. And then in Stanley's case, Stanley actually has to go back to school to practice. He has to use the school piano. And in his words, he said, he had a little bit of an attention deficit disorder and he wasn't always patient to wait in line, for his term to be able to use the school piano to get his practice in. And he didn't do as well as Mark did. So you can see that, the influences these two kids had were different and allowed them different paths towards their success. And there's a happy ending to the story because both Mark and Stanley went on to do really important and great things. But, you think about even fast forwarding to today, this is an example of something that's quite common. And maybe today it's probably more prevalent that it's a white student and a student of color where this opportunity gap exists. In fact, for a statistic, for those of you in Minnesota, students at the 8th grade level, 66% of white students are performing at grade level standards when they're in 8th grade, compared to only 28% of Black students, 25% of American Indian students, and 35% of Hispanic students. So, whether we look at this as, an achievement gap or an opportunity gap, it really comes down to many of these influences that are not in the student's control. And one other thing that Dr. Brown impressed upon me is what students see and what they are told often by adult influences in their life is what they become. And so really giving students of color the opportunity to have the skills to navigate successfully in their adult life was really the cornerstone of what Dr. Brown impressed upon me. So I hope that that brief story kind of gives you a picture of Stanley and Mark as young kids with different opportunities in their educational path forward. And next, I'd like to just share this short video before we get into our discussion. So I'll start this, Jenny, and if you could just let me know if it's playing okay, that would be great.
Yep.
The achievement gap is that difference in academic performance and proficiency between African American and Latino and Native American students versus the Anglo or white students.
It's really the difference between Black and brown students versus their white counterparts and the academic difference that exists. It's also by income. And in Denver, we know that income and ethnicity are highly correlated. And it's that gap that exists from achievement that starts at kindergarten and doesn't, and while we're doing a better job as a school district, it doesn't ever really close.
The achievement gap, which is also frequently now talked about as the opportunity gap, is the inequity of opportunity that our children have to achieve the same future in their lives by especially race and class.
And the question behind the achievement gap is why do some students do so well and other students we never overcome their zip code or their parents' income level? Why can't schools make up for that?
It shows up because students who have different socioeconomic backgrounds don't get access to a set of skills or experiences, which means they show up to school, kindergarten, 5th grade, 9th grade, freshman year of college, without the same set of background they would have gotten if they were born a mile to the east or a mile to the west or with a parent that made $50,000 more than their parents make.
There are some individuals who just getting out of 8th grade is enough, who just getting through high school is enough. And then there's another demographic of individuals who are being told graduate school, higher education. And I think the achievement gap that I see comes in the messaging that we give to students.
I think you can also look at achievement gaps around academic preparation, around students with special needs, students who are English language learners. I think there are really important gaps there as well.
A lot of times it has to do with what's happening at the student's home.
I think the achievement gap really starts with what people are calling it now, which is an opportunity gap. So what you see at the end is a reflection of what happens at the beginning of the education system.
The allocation of resources for the schools, the allocation of human resources, the buildings that students are in, even the layout of buildings that way. And so I think all of those different factors go into the achievement gap. And then I think the achievement gap is as well the time and opportunity that our parents have to really be advocates for their own child's education.
The achievement gap is that you as a white middle class person has to run 26.2 miles. The Latino student has to run 30 miles. The Black student who grew up in poverty with the single mom has to run 35 miles. That's really the achievement gap. What's happening is that nobody's showing up at the starting line equal. And somehow, at the end of the marathon, is a college graduation or is a great career. Well, they have to make up 10 miles.
When we talk about the achievement gap, which I call an opportunity gap, and the reason I do is because it's not the kids' fault they're not achieving. The blame lies here with policymakers and others who have neglected to really factor in their achievement as a priority.
All right, well, I hope that created some thoughts for all of you. I like this quote, and I particularly liked, there was a teacher about halfway through, his name was Quincy Shannon, if you caught it, where he talked about the importance of messaging to our students. And again, that was, reinforced what Dr. Brown shared with me, is that, how important it is that adults, parents, educators, community members are making sure that we are showing students, all students, scholars, the true potential that they have to go as far as they can, and not saying that, you know, a student who's learning English as a second language is always going to be behind, or a student that has a single parent, you know, isn't going to get the tutoring and support at home after school that a student of two parents at home is going to get. So, you know, I think that's an important message as we go into this next part of the dialogue, which is really an open discussion on some of the ways that we can all think about taking action to support reducing the opportunity gap and creating, you know, this level playing field for all students. And to kind of help us with that discussion, on this next page, there is a set of 7 policy recommendations that is put together by the National Education Policy Center, which is a nonprofit organization that is focused on, you know, offering recommendations to school boards and, you know, school officials to really help improve educational success in K through 12 education. And I hope this is showing up okay on the screen for everyone, but there's these 7 areas, and I know we have students on the call, we have educators on the call, and parents on the call, and I'd really just like to invite folks to either use the chat or to come off mute and help me think through some of these things that, you know, if we could look at differently with funding, with policy, with community support, could really effectively help close this opportunity gap that we see today. So I will take a minute and see if there's anyone who would like to speak up on an experience or question that they might have.
And this is Jenny. Feel free to raise your hand if you want to speak, or you can message something in the chat and I can share it. Lynn's raised her hand, so we'll have Lynn start.
So yesterday we had, I'm Lynn Casamayor. I am a college success coach at Key West High School in Key West, Florida. Yesterday we had a professional day, and so our students were not in school, but as a staff, we all met in the auditorium. And one of the first things that I noticed was, and I am not a teacher in the classroom, but I was the only female of color in the room. And one of the things that we were focusing on was, and we were talking about the same thing, is bridging the gap. And one of the things that we were talking about was having the students make connections with teachers. And the thing that when I left there, the thing that I reflected on was every day during lunch, and this is my first year at the high school, but every day during lunch, my room is literally packed with students. I mean, sometimes there is no place to move. And I love that because they have a connection with me. And for them, it's almost finally they have a connection, and they know that it's somebody, number one, who, you know, for a lot of them, I look like them. And that's something they've been missing, but it's also somebody that they know that they can depend on. They know that I'm gonna always tell them the truth. And I think we need more of that, and especially in my particular school, where, again, before I came, we didn't have that. And so, you know, again, you know, I think all these things are great as well, but I think too, you know, our kids need somebody that they feel is there for them.
Thanks, Lynn. That was a great point. And I think that's one of the things that I know Minnesota schools struggle with, is how to get more teachers, hire more teachers and of a diverse background to have that kind of connection with students. Dan, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I really appreciate, Lynn, your comments, and I couldn't agree more that we need to figure out how to get more people of color into teaching. The challenge, and I don't know if anyone has any thoughts, in the short term, you know, with the makeup of teachers that we have today, how can we, what do we do so that some of our current teachers are able to establish some of that credibility that they don't naturally have because they're not people of color, such that students would feel, maybe not as comfortable as they do with you, Lynn, but more comfortable than they do today. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Dan, I can read a little bit more on in the center there. There's a focus on reflecting students' cultural diversity. And certainly to Lynn's point, having teachers that look like their student populations is important. But again, I'm remembering Dr. Brown telling me kind of in a joking way that, most teachers are going to be white females. I mean, that's if you looked at the demographics of teachers entering schooling to become certified as teachers, that is the prevalent demographic. And in this area, this policy recommendation, it says, whether you're a teacher of color or you're a white female teacher, which is the majority, how do you develop that cadre of teachers that is really well trained and has a deep understanding of students' diversity and how inequality affects them, and promoting instruction that is culturally relevant for the student body and supports efforts to change attitudes and beliefs that administrators, teachers, school personnel, and students have regarding teaching, learning, and student ability. And so, I think that, belief or misbelief, I think, is something that really is an area that we've got to break down. And, this attempt to limit the potential of students because we're saying they're from a lower income family or a single income family, or, they didn't grow up speaking English, whatever that barrier is, most times has, the student has no impact themselves over affecting it. How do we give those students the same shot at the graduate school opportunity, at that, first career that's going to help them, obtain, a livelihood that they can really be excited about as their career forward?
I just wanted to share some comments in the chat, Erica. So Donzel had quoted, there was a study, many studies, that all students benefit from having diverse teachers, but especially kids of color who perform better, are more engaged and graduate at higher rates, which was a really good point. And also Tommy had mentioned that it's a good sign that more and more colleges are starting to cancel the requirement for SAT and ACT scores for admission requirements, which is good to a certain extent, because a lot of the students who perform well on those are able to pay to have those trainings and those sessions after school to basically do well on a test that's supposedly supposed to show like how smart you are, and really it's giving a level up to kids who have more money and more privilege. So it's another good point from Tommy. Thanks for sharing, guys.
Yeah, and again, I'd invite Lynn or anyone else who's close to educators or has personal experience, that this idea of having an individualized education is one too that I think is gaining momentum. That using the achievement gap is using standardized tests at different grade levels to show who is succeeding and who's not. And more often than not, it's a measure for educators to know if they're getting their class through certain benchmarks. And it really should be about the student. If the student is at the center of everything that we're doing to both in the classroom and outside of the classroom, drive their successful education progress, and if that needs to be a little bit more individualized based on this opportunity gap, I think that could be a really successful path forward versus this focus on achievement or the no child left behind kind of philosophy that that it's all in the test score.
So I see Donzel has his hand raised, and then at Ortherston, sorry if I mispronounced your name, then you can go after Donzel.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. First of all, great attendance for this this event tonight. It's really encouraging to see so many people with so much going on take time out of their Tuesday evening to be with us. I just wanted to say that, for those of us who are striving to be anti-racist, do everything we can to make the community better. If you want to see the impact of this opportunity gap not being fixed, just look no further than Minnesota. People were surprised what happened with George Floyd. There are many of us who were shocked and saddened, but not surprised, because Minnesota has the biggest opportunity gap of any state in the country. The difference between how white students perform and students of color perform. That translates directly into the other gaps, which are also some of the biggest in the country, whether it's the employment gap, whether it is the home ownership gap, whether it is the incarceration gap, whether it's the wealth gap. I can go on and on and on to illustrate how not fixing this problem creates significant disparities within our society. And you'd say, well, we all should want to fix it because it's the right thing to do. It's also important, for us in terms of your own well-being. If you look at what's happening in the country right now, where we have significant shortages of labor, there's no drivers for trucks, there's people who can't work in stores. There are stuff that's just not on shelves. Eventually the economy is going to suffer because we simply don't have enough labor. We're an aging country. And then there's a big part of our population that could work, but they've been locked out of the workforce because since they started school, they've been left behind, eventually drop out. The law enforcement system is not set up to help them succeed. They get a strike against them, and now they're not employable. We have to fix this problem if we want our society to be successful. It's the right thing to do, but it's also an important thing to do in terms of how our economy functions. We've got hundreds of thousands of people who continually are not able to participate in the workforce, and we have a significant shortage of skilled labor. It just doesn't make any sense. So what I'd ask everyone to do is, there's many of you on the call that are educators. I know Orion, who'll speak next, is one of them. But those of us who are citizens, get involved with the school boards. Use your influence to force change in your school boards across the country, because although Minnesota's the worst, it's not the only one. So I'll stop there.
Go ahead, Orion.
First, I want to thank a really good friend of mine, Donzo, for asking me to be here. I see that I have two sisters on here, actually three on here, so I'm happy to see them on here too. My name is Orion Thurston. I am one of the principals here in Rochester, Minnesota. And I want to piggyback on a couple of things. One, what Lynn said minutes ago when she talked about being that only face. When I first got here in Rochester, which is one of the largest school districts in Minnesota, I would say at least probably top 10 in Minnesota. I was the only African-American principal for at least 2.5, maybe 3 years in a district that has at least 40% students of color throughout the whole district. And I agree with her totally 100%. I think that, when I look at my office and I see the enormous amount of students that come in to talk to me that want to have a relationship and they have no one else to connect with in the building. Now I'm talking about my first couple of years. It was overwhelming because, you wish you had more staff members in the building. I don't know what the answer is to hiring more staff of color, but I will say this, there were plenty of opportunities that our district had to hire and we didn't. And so I think that because of favoritism, because of biasness, because of cliquing throughout the district, I think we tend to just look out for ourselves when it comes to hiring who we want to be in there. We look out for our friends' husbands, whoever we go to happy hour with, whoever our kids are playing in the neighborhood with. We're looking at that opposed to looking at the quality of people who are of color that can bring a different creativity to our district. And for me, it's sad to see that. I think for me personally, I've been able with another principal that, that works with me as well. I've been able to bring in 2 teachers of color this year. We have a couple of hall monitors of color this year. And when I see the faces of the students in our building, that's really pleased of what we're doing in the building. I know we have more work to do, but it's a progress in place. But I think that also when I can't think of the young lady was talking about coming from the single mom. I'm from Key West, Florida. Those from Key West know me, grew up with me. Was single mom, never knew my dad. But I think the biggest thing that helped me to be where I'm at today is the love that I receive from my family, my community, and from teachers. And I think we lost that village. I think we've lost the village to help students of color to see where they can go at in life. I think that if we get that back, that'll help because I believe success in education starts in a home. And I think we have to start valuing our homes and we start educating our homes. I think when you look at parenting, I was looking at the data the other day at work, grandmas are 35 and 40 years old now. We don't see grandma being 60 and 70 years old anymore. If you look at this generational breakdown, grandmas are 35, great grandmas now are 45, 50. And so when you have a history of not knowing your heritage, not knowing what you need to respect in terms of the history, the people I grew up with that's on here know what I'm talking about. We know our history. We know what we stand on and the principles and what we wear on our sleeve. But this younger generation don't have that because when you have a grandma that's young and still hopping the streets or still out there not doing what they're supposed to do in terms of responsibility, it's hard for them to learn what needs to be learned when the person that's supposed to teach them what they need to learn don't know of themselves. And I think we just have to do a better job at educating our parents to help them educate their kids. So I want to start with that, but I know I have more to say before we get off, but I just want to start with that and say that we just got to do a better job all around the board when it comes to helping young students today. Thank you.
It was very, very powerful. I'm not able to see the chat, Jenny. So if there's others that had comments, I think that point on the village or the community, this isn't something that one of the educators in the video said it's up to the policymakers and the educators to close the opportunity gap. And, I agree with some of that, where we need to focus on how education is funded in our communities. I'll just for a minute share that there was an example. The Justice Alan Page is a former Supreme Court justice in the state of Minnesota who was leading the Page Education Foundation and an amendment to change how schools are funded in the state of Minnesota. And on one of the broadcasts that he was sharing, he held up the example of the state of Florida that had a similar disparity in terms of performance or opportunity of white students versus students of color in that state. And in 2006, the state of Florida adopted a change in how property taxes or other funding for education in the state was appropriated to schools, not just where wealthy school districts with high property taxes were funded differently than inner city schools or magnet schools, but they really leveled the playing field. And now, the state of Florida is in the top 5 of the nation with the smallest gap between white learners and learners of color. So, there's maybe a big factor that relates to how we fund schools, that we fund hiring the right, teachers, enough teachers, and creating the environments that really help students succeed. But I think that, that last point on outside of school, the family environment, the community, the village environment around that student that helps them see their potential. And, Lynn, you shared with me too, just how to encourage what's possible and let students, believe in themselves, that they can really reach for the stars, instead of having this talk toward a student to say, you're never going to get any further than, high school graduation. That messaging to students, again, I'm appreciating how important that is, and what a limiter it can be just simply with our words.
So Judy would like to speak, so I'll let her go next. Thanks, Erica.
Shower or what?
Judy, did you want to unmute? Oh.
Why do you call you that?
Did I raise my hand and not know I raised my hand?
Probably.
Is that what I did?
Orion, you need to mute.
Okay, sorry, Judy. Just wanted to give everybody an opportunity.
I did put a question in the chat, Erica. There are several people on from Florida. There's some students and others, and I would be curious as to their view, because I am surprised. I did not know that Florida passed that law. That is one of the big reasons why schools that are mostly populated with kids of color do not get as much funding, because in most states, the property taxes are the highest in the suburbs. So most of the white schools get the benefit of that property tax base. And in the areas where there's depressed, that's a lot of where the kids of color are, and they don't get it. So it's unfair split of funding. I didn't know the state of Florida passed that law. I didn't know that it had that impact. So I'm curious as to what the folks who live in Florida, what are you seeing on the ground? The students, what are you feeling? Because we definitely see the impact here. We see the disparity. So I'm just curious as to what you guys are seeing.
I'll start first. So when we talk about opportunity, and I'm going to call Tricia is on the line, and Tricia came in to take stock in children when she was in 7th grade. And Tricia, Tricia was something. She was a little bit of a challenge. Love her to pieces. But I looked at her, and I saw that she was in a lower level math class. But I looked at her test scores, and my question was, why is she in this math class? So I called her in, and why are you not in Algebra 1? For 8th grade. She should have been in Algebra 1 in 7th grade because her test scores in 6th grade, determined that she should have been, but she wasn't for whatever reason. But I think that anyway, it ended up, I called her in, we talked about it, called her mom, told her mom, you need to call the school and demand that next year she be put in Algebra 1, no questions asked, that is where you want her. But I think that if you ask my students, especially Valerie, I know Valerie's talked about this a lot, they have a hard time getting into the classes that they want. Valerie, can you speak on that, please? Or somebody?
Yeah. I remember in the 7th grade, I think I just shared this with Miss Jenny, but in the 7th grade, in the 8th grade, I was put in like a regular science class, and I would notice that like every other student was in a like advanced, it was like called advanced science or something. And like every morning I'd be so bored in the class because we do the same thing over and over again, and we weren't like going fast, we were just going at a regular pace. And I wanted to switch out because I knew that in high school that they do the same thing. I'd be put in environmental science, which would just not be an honors class, it'd be a regular class. And I asked to switch out, but they never switched me out because I had no like advocate. Like I didn't have my mom to come in, but my mom did come in and they still didn't switch me out of that class. So now I'm like, I'm not a year behind, but I'm like not where I want to be.
Anybody else? I know Michaela's on. Madonna or Caitlin or anybody else. Rosa have that experience or something similar?
Oh, wait, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I think a lot of it kind of goes back to when you all were mentioning before about like the SAT and ACT scores. Those tests, like seeing how they're not weighing as heavily now, like really makes me happy, because a lot of the time what would happen with classes is everything would be determined based on those test scores. So it would be really discouraging for someone like me who academically, like in class, I'm really good. My grades are always really high. And then I go to take one test and it determines everything that places me in my classes for the next year. So it's really discouraging when you go to a counselor and you're like, I can handle the course load, I can handle the class. It's just when it comes to testing, it really displaces me in such a way that it makes it look like I can't perform as well, but I can. And that was really discouraging with testing, like those big tests like the SAT and the ACT, where it's like I'm applying to these colleges and it makes me feel a little discouraged when I see my score and it's not the baseline of what the college wants. And it hurts to see sometimes when I'm applying now.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Could I just piggyback on what Caitlin said? Because that's a very interesting comment that she made, because for someone like me who went to college and was assuming that everybody there was there, like, you know, had to do really well on their SAT, ACT scores to get into college, because I thought that was the important thing. And talking to white students, especially white athletes, and finding out their ACT, SAT scores were like really low. So the fact that they're allowing certain students to get in with, you know, lower test scores than other students who probably deserve to be there, it was just kind of shocking to me to hear that. And I agree completely with Caitlin and commiserate with the fact that she's doing so well in the classes, and one test determines how people think you're going to succeed in the rest of your educational career, which I think is ridiculous.
Or may I add one more thing? Also, a lot of the time, like tomorrow is a perfect example. Like at QS High School, they're hosting the SAT for the seniors and the PSAT for the freshman, sophomore, and junior. And for the seniors, the way that it's working is that if you get like the composite score needed, you can use that score to almost pass you for the FSA score. And when they were talking about it the other day, it was making me think, because with the pandemic, it affected the times that kids were testing. Like last year, we weren't testing. We didn't test until almost a year and a half since being in that class. And so when they were talking about how the SAT scores will replace the scores of the FSA, it made me wonder, because a lot of the times before the FSA testing that we were taking last year, there wasn't many resources to help us refresh on all the material that we had learned. So it felt like a disadvantage, because it feels like they're saying that it's our fault that we aren't passing these big tests, but we're not given the resources to help us in order to pass the tests in the first place. And it sucks on, like, that's how, I don't know how to word it better, but it feels like we kind of get put at a disadvantage, at least at QS High School. I'm not sure how it works like in Minnesota, where some of you all are, how it works anywhere else, but that's how it works here. And it is strange to see that you can't pass one big test, but if you pass another big test, it fills in for a different one, if that makes sense. Like it never really makes sense. And like for me, like I've passed the FSAs, so like tomorrow I can't take the SAT. So like I can't improve my score to get in to go to apply to colleges, but like they're like picking and choosing who takes the SAT.
Thanks for sharing. That's interesting. Sean Allen has his hand raised, and then Judy can go after him.
Hello, everybody. I'm cousins and family. I feel everybody's family in this world, but so what I'm hearing is some of these things have been going on since before time. I know growing up in Jacksonville, and being able to experience different educational systems coming from Jacksonville, Florida, where I experienced the same thing. And it's sad to hear that it's still going on, where I'm in advanced classes or gifted classes, and then you go into your next year and you're put in remedial classes or your standard classes, where it was a yearly fight to get ahead, get to the classes that you needed to get ahead. And that happened, I think all through my grade schools, all the way through education, all the way up through every school I went to. Then to have the disparity of coming to California and Palo Alto Unified School District and thinking I'm in these honors classes. And when I got to California, there was a huge difference where I was taking French 4 in Jacksonville, Florida. I get here, and when the teachers found out I couldn't even speak a lick of French, they put me in French 1. And it was just the disparities between the educational systems and how they were teaching. And then the racism that was the foundation of all the testing and all the schools that I went to, that kind of hindered the students and the ability for us to achieve. That's just sad for me to hear that is continuing. I have a friend that, on another note, that is a teacher here in California in Salinas, where she's been teaching kindergartners, and she's in a Spanish immersion program, and her daughter's just getting ready to graduate college. And she told me she doesn't want her daughter to become a teacher. And I think that's a problem within itself, because we have a Latina woman that's been a teacher teaching Spanish immersion and is really dedicated, but she fears that her own child would become a teacher. And I asked her why, and she just said there's too many reasons. It's tough. The battle I have to fight as a Latina woman in this system with a county that is mostly Latino. And so the challenges there, I think, is also challenges that have to be addressed when you're teachers. You know, I remember growing up, I wanted to go into the Army like my father, but and I remember my dad was happy to hear that, but now to hear that a teacher doesn't want their child to be a teacher because of all the challenges teachers have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Judy, did you want to talk? Your hand is raised. Oh.
Hi, I'm Judy Leggett from Key West as well. As a matter of fact, I moved back home after being in Tallahassee years. But and just listening to the high school students and their struggles with it's disheartening. And I know a lot of the kids, I hear a lot of the stories, and sometimes it's actually angering because you hear stories of how their self-esteem is probably affected by the treatment they receive from the teachers at the high school here in Key West. And our kids, the bottom line is that without opportunity, our kids don't even get to the resources. So that's the thing where we have to when are we going to get to, or how are we going to get to even having the opportunity, letting them have the opportunity to even get to the resources, because they're not even on an even playing field with everybody else. So without being on that even playing field, the opportunity, they're not presented with those. And so that's what I want to say I'm looking forward to. Am I optimistic, to be honest? No. And that's what's disheartening when it comes to our kids, because they have those struggles. How do we help them overcome those struggles?
You know, Judy, one of the questions I asked Dr. Stanley Brown when I met with him is if he had an example of, you know, a state or even a country that had this figured out. And he talked a little bit about Finland, and you know, many countries that really take a stand and say, you know, we are going to have universal early childhood. You know, we're going to have universal, you know,
universal pre-K, universal.
Yeah,
I was just typing something in the chat about that, but go ahead. Erin.
Yeah, exactly. You know, even if it's a chance for, you know, pre-kindergarten students to come, that you know, get a breakfast and a lunch that they have access to, you know, not just, you know, maybe the child care center down the street, but, you know, a really quality teacher-led early childhood education that gives, you know, again, I'm not an educator, but just the chance for an educator to see early on, you know, the student, you know, needs glasses. It's simply that, you know, they're not able to see well enough. And once that, you know, once the student has an access to, you know, vision care, you know, they're on the right track. Or this student is just too tired and isn't ready to learn. And it's, you know, it's a good hot breakfast in the morning. Or it's a routine, you know, a routine that, you know, a parent has a place to be able to get their student, their child to, on a very regular basis, that gives them, you know, the access to that environment. You know, I think that, you know, that's the example of maybe like Finland or another country has that in place and has had it for decades, and they see this disparity gap almost eliminated if you start very early. So that was one.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, Erica, that's a great point. I think the problem that we have that Finland maybe has, but not as much, is that we have this long running systemic racism that I feel like people don't want to spend money if it means that Black students, I hate to say it that way, but people don't want their money to go towards anything that benefits people who aren't white. And I feel like people are willing to, you know, condemn their own kids to suffer for, you know, not having universal pre-K because they don't want those families to have it. And I think that's a struggle with the US, that is, as much as Finland has it figured out, I think they don't have the same problems.
Right. Yeah.
We do. But yeah. I totally agree though. Universal pre-K, especially if it's funded, because no offense to people who don't have young kids, daycare costs are like a second mortgage. It's very, yeah, it's a lot.
Jenny, this might be a great time. I'm going to advance the slide to the last slide here, and you can help me facilitate. You know, one of the things that we always do in our community in action events is to close with really a chance to pause for a moment and think about how we can move from educating ourselves to actually taking action. You know, we've had a lot of great contributions tonight from folks who have lived experiences with this, and you know, people like myself that I'm trying to increase my education and take action. You know, one of the things that, you know, we see a lot right now is school board election signs. So I can lead off with one of the things that I'm looking at is, you know, I might not have even gone to vote for a off-cycle election for school board candidates. I said I don't have children in school, so it's something that wasn't a front priority for me. But you know, that is one way that, you know, that I'm looking at differently. I should learn what each of these candidates has in terms of their position on equity in education, funding in education, and you know, things like, you know, pre-K, things like the importance of testing standards versus individualized learning plans. So you know, that's one thing that, you know, this time of year is often that cycle where school board candidates are running for office, and that's a great way to get involved. But you know, just like it to open it up to others on things that you think that you individually could take on as an action coming out of this discussion?
Yeah, I would, and I putting in the chat, I mean, I would encourage people to go to your school board meetings. Like Erica said, it's, even if you don't have children, this has an impact on the society that we're living in. This is the root of that perpetuates a lot of the racism that Jenny was talking about. And it may feel hard. It may feel that some of the school board meetings are very contentious. You've seen it on the news. If you just saw on the news, one of the altercations that took place, that was right here in our school district. Those were the meetings that I was going to, that Jenny was going to, that Tracy was going to. This the most recent one was an altercation. But I will say, we kept going. We did get some breakthroughs. Is it perfect? No. But we have the first, person of color, woman, superintendent in our school district. You can't tell me that didn't happen, because every month we went to those school board meetings for almost 2 years. We have equity programming in our schools, even though there were many right-wing sort of radicals that came out and demonstrated against that and created a lot of uncomfortable situations for school board members. But there is equity program. Now, is it perfect? No. Is it exactly where we wanted to be? No, but we were able to move some things forward. And we got one of the principals in one of the elementary schools, person of color. Those are all things that I believe happened because we kept going to those school board meetings over and over and getting up and speaking at the open mic. And so part of what we're trying to do with ARC is, we need to talk about these things and build each other's confidence to speak out and take action. Because if we don't take action, if we don't speak out, these things will keep happening. And, the students can only do so much. I'm so proud of all of them for speaking today. A lot of it is on us. We've experienced it. Orion talked about it. A lot of the things these students are talking about, literally I experienced when I was in Key West in school. I had to personally, going from 8th grade to 9th grade, I was put in remedial math. I had to go to the guidance counselors and ask them, why am I in this remedial math? And they said, well, because your test scores. I know I can do better than that. No one told me the test score was going to impact me. I didn't know that. No one explained that to me. I said, so I want to get in this class. I want to get back on the right track. They made me go to summer school, but I was able to do it. But at least I had people around me supporting me. There's so many guys I grew up with and women I grew up with, young ladies that did not have that support network, that had the confidence to stand up. So that's what I would ask people to do. Stand up, talk at your school board meetings, do everything you can for these kids.
Thanks, Donzel. Lynn has her hand raised, and then Judy.
For me, the other day, our superintendent, I guess it was yesterday, she sent out a survey, and they're talking about affordable housing. And affordable housing in Key West is really very, very funny. A 1-bedroom apartment, if you can get it for $1,500 a month, that they call that affordable. But anyway, so she was talking about affordable housing, and I decided that I'm going to tell her exactly how I feel. And so, because the first excuse they always used when you talk about hiring, a person of color is, where are they going to live? We don't have housing. And so my thing is, what I said in my survey with my name on it was make a commitment to set aside housing for teachers of color. And, and I just put it out there. And I think the other thing for me is that, and I'm so proud that I have 17 of my students on tonight. And one of the things that I will promise you that I'll do, I try to be there every day because I know that they need me there every day. But I also want you all to experience these kinds of things that don't come to us very often in Key West, but you gain so much knowledge and it just exposes you to a different world where you can learn. And so that's one of the reasons that I always encourage you to do these kinds of things, because I want you, and I believe in you, and I want you to be your absolute best. And I'm always going to be there for you, and I'm always going to tell you the truth. And they always tell me that I have no filters, and I don't when it comes to them, because I want them to know exactly how I feel. And so I'm always going to stand up for you. I'm always going to be there. I don't even leave to go to lunch because I stay there with you guys. And so that's what I'm going to continue to do.
They're so lucky, Lynn, to have you as a role model and a champion.
I'll leave the students with one more story, especially the students at Key West, because I'm seeing a lot of them. They spoke and they're putting it in the chat. Again, it's really great. There's so many schools that are doing away with the SAT. So don't stress out over the SAT. I understand, but you shouldn't stress out. I'll tell you, I worked my butt off to get the best score I could get in the SAT. I didn't get the score I wanted. Still got recruited, played college football, and it was a white guy that I played with from Chicago, pretty wealthy. He went to Notre Dame, but decided to transfer to our school to Purdue. One day he and I were talking, and he wasn't the smartest guy in the world. I mean, you could kind of tell that. But he said he got a 1200 in the SAT. I said, what? He said, oh, I got a 1200 in the SAT. I'm like, how did you get a 1200 in the SAT? He said, I paid for it. He said, Donzo, I didn't take a test in school since I was in kindergarten. He said, I paid for every kid to take all my tests. So you have to realize when we talk about, there's some kids that have privilege and they have the ability to, the guy said they're ahead, they're running a regular marathon, you're running 50 miles, you are. But if you do the work, eventually that will catch up. So don't lose your confidence. Just because it looks like someone else they're skating by or they're getting this, they're getting that. Do that hard work that you're doing, Rosa and Caitlin and Valerie and all the other, Dania, all of you that are on the call. I guarantee you that when you guys get to college, you're going to be extremely well prepared because you did the work and you built the confidence. Keep listening to Miss Lynn. You've got an advocate, use her. That's what I would tell you. That's a true story. True story. You are smart. You guys have the capability. We owe it to you to do everything we can to change these policies to make sure you have access to more of that opportunity as you move forward. We'll keep doing that. You guys keep fighting for what you need to. Keep working hard. Keep doing it. Keep listening to Miss Lynn.
Awesome. Well, that's a great note to end on, because these students are really the future and can help us all make this change. So I'm going to pass it back over to Jenny, but I just wanted to personally thank everyone for being here tonight. This is a great audience. It's really been helpful for me to build my courage to have a conversation on this topic and do some research. So appreciate the great conversation. And Jenny, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Erica. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Lynn, thank you for sharing your thoughts and for inviting all of your students to join us. I really appreciate hearing their input. For those of you who are continuing to follow ARC, you can check out our website. It's www.joinarc.org. We'll be posting this video later. Our next Community in Action event is December 7th. It's another evening at 7 o'clock Central, and we're going to be talking about disparate health outcomes, maternal mortality rate, some of the history of medical racism, and a lot of it will be coming from the book Medical Apartheid. And I will be leading that discussion. So look for that on the website, and hopefully we'll have another great discussion in December. But thank you again, everybody. We appreciate all of you spending your time with us, and have a great rest of the week. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Later.
Yeah.
Bye.
Hey,
Tracy,
Tracy.
hopefully I'll see you on Thursday.
Yes, Thursday.
Thursday, 5? Is it 5 p.m.?
5 o'clock. Rally for
Okay.
Public Education.
Yeah,
In
I
chat.
think I might bring the kiddos because 5 o'clock's like right at that cutoff time.
Jenna will have all 4 of her kids with her.
Okay, then it won't
Yeah.
go bad.
Yep.
Take care. Good to see you, OT.
What's up, man?